Haruto Akihara wasn't just a name, he was a legend. A visionary who built a tiny Tokyo startup into a global billion-dollar empire. And now, in the US, he ran his business from a luxurious skyscraper in the heart of New York City, where his every decision could make or break fortunes. And if there was one thing Haruto valued more than money, it was absolute control. He was meticulous, cold, and relentless. The world to him was winners and losers. Haruto accepted nothing less than perfection from his employees, his partners, and especially himself. In his office, there was no room for error. A single slip-up was a personal affront. But what no one knew was that behind this facade of perfection, he harbored a secret, something that drove his ruthlessness and kept him awake at night. Haruto Akihara wasn't just a powerful businessman, he was a man at war with himself, and that war was about to explode in a way he never imagined. Aiko Tanaka was the kind of person you didn't notice, even when she was right in front of you. Every day, she arrived at the imposing Akihara Global building before dawn, wearing a simple uniform and a hesitant smile. She worked hard, cleaning luxurious offices, fetching coffee for executives who barely glanced her way, silently listening to conversations about worlds she knew she'd never be a part of. This job was everything to Aiko. Not because she loved it, far from it, but because it was her only way to secure a better future for her younger brother, Ryota. After losing their parents in a tragic accident in Japan, Aiko took on the responsibility of raising him. When he received a scholarship to a school in the US, she didn't hesitate. She packed up and moved with him across the world. Life in New York wasn't easy. Rent was expensive, healthcare, and food even more so. Every penny she earned went straight to bills and Ryota's education. She barely had any time for herself, but seeing her brother smile when she got home made it all worthwhile. Still, living amidst luxury and constant disdain weighed heavily on her soul. The immaculate hallways of Akihara Global, the Italian designer furniture, the $1,000 suits. It all only deepened the chasm between her and the people she worked for. To everyone, she was just a maid, a disposable cog in the machine. But Aiko had something no one else there seemed to possess: resilience. While the executives worried about bonuses and investments, she worried about simple yet essential things. How to feed Ryota, how to save for his next tuition payment, how to ensure they'd never fall back into extreme poverty. And then, that morning, a small accident changed everything. Aiko was nervous, rushing to prepare coffee trays for an important meeting. Her mind was elsewhere, on the phone with Ryota, who had called in a panic saying he needed money for expensive school supplies. She tried to calm him down while balancing the trays. As she entered the meeting room with all the powerful executives staring at her, her hands trembled. A coffee cup spilled onto the pristine carpet, the dark liquid spreading across the white wool that undoubtedly cost more than she earned in a month. The silence that followed was deafening. Haruto Akihara sat at the head of the table watching it all. His eyes, cold as ice, locked onto her. He didn't need to raise his voice. With a simple raised eyebrow and a sharp tone, he declared, "You're fired! Leave now!" Aiko tried to explain, but her voice failed her. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. She wouldn't cry in front of them. She quickly gathered her things and left the room, feeling the weight of their stares on her back. Haruto's words echoed in her mind. To him, she was nobody, just another failure. As she walked down the hallway with her head down, Aiko stumbled and dropped her bag. Papers and personal items scattered across the floor. Among them was a simple bracelet, its beads worn from use, something she always carried with her. She quickly picked up her bag and left before anyone could see her. Haruto, however, had noticed the bracelet. Something about it felt familiar, but he couldn't place why. After the meeting ended, he found it on the floor, forgotten. He picked it up without much thought, but as he held it, a strange feeling washed over him. It couldn't be. He'd seen something like this before. Aiko went home that day with a heavy heart. She needed to find another job, needed to keep supporting Ryota, but little did she know that small mistake had set something much bigger in motion. a connection between her and the most powerful man in that company, one that would forever change the course of their lives. Haruto held the bracelet in his hands, examining it closely. It was a simple piece made of wooden beads, some worn with age. It had no apparent value, yet he couldn't shake the feeling it stirred within him. Something about it seemed to awaken a distant memory, buried under years of relentless work and ambition. He shook his head, trying to dispel the thought. "Why am I so distracted by this?" he murmured to himself. Haruto rarely allowed himself to feel anything beyond focus and determination. But now, as he held that small object, something inside him felt like it was breaking. That night, in his luxury penthouse, he found himself unable to concentrate. Financial reports lay open on his laptop, but his mind was fixated on the bracelet. He had left it on the glass table, and involuntarily, his eyes wandered back to it several times. There was something there, a connection he couldn't quite pinpoint. Vague memories began to surface, like fragments of a dream that refused to fade. He recalled a park from his childhood in Japan, the laughter of a child, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, and a small hand holding his. The image was blurred, but clear enough to make him feel uneasy. As he tried to organize his thoughts, a specific memory emerged with greater clarity. He remembered a young girl who used to play with him when he was little. She wore a similar handmade bracelet as a charm. Haruto furrowed his brow. Could it be the same bracelet? And if so, what did that mean? Time passed, but the memories grew more insistent. Haruto recalled the sound of her laughter, something pure and infectious. He didn't know her name, or at least couldn't remember it. But he knew she had been important to him in some way. A companion on lonely days, perhaps even a piece of the happiness he lost while growing up. He began to wonder, who was the employee that left this bracelet behind? Why did she carry something that seemed so connected to my past? As the question swirled in his mind, Haruto felt a flicker of curiosity ignite within him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. What if this woman, this Aiko Tanaka, held the key to a part of his life he thought he had buried forever? Haruto wasn't the type of man to believe in coincidences. Everything in his life was planned, calculated. But this was something he couldn't explain. The mystery began to gnaw at his mind. For the first time in years, Haruto felt an unease that didn't stem from financial issues or business decisions. It was something deeper, more personal. He needed to know more about this young woman. But how? She was already gone, and he didn't even know her last name. He called his assistant and requested the full file on the employee he had fired. The assistant looked at him quizzically but didn't ask questions. Within minutes, Haruto had Aiko Tanaka's details in his hands. He quickly skimmed through the file. A 25-year-old Japanese woman with a modest background. Nothing stood out until he read the name of her hometown, Kanazawa. Haruto froze at the sight of the name. He had also grown up in Kanazawa, although he had left as a child. The city's name brought a wave of memories rushing back. Images of old streets, snow-covered temples, and a childhood he had tried desperately to forget. And among those memories, there she was, the girl with the bracelet. It could be a coincidence, he said aloud, trying to convince himself. But he knew it wasn't. Something connected Aiko to that forgotten piece of his life. Haruto felt a weight in his chest, something he couldn't explain. It was as if the bracelet not only made him remember, but also confronted him with something he had lost along the way. That night, Haruto resolved to uncover more. He, the man who never looked back, was about to dive into a chapter of his past that he had buried long ago. And somehow he knew this journey would change everything. Haruto spent the night awake, analyzing every detail he had uncovered. The candy shop in Kanazawa was a memory he had almost erased, but now it returned with unexpected force. He remembered how that little shop had been a refuge during his lonely childhood, a place where he felt less like the son of an ambitious businessman and more like an ordinary child. The girl with the warm smile, who always offered him the best sweets and called him by name, now had a face. Aiko. The bracelet with its worn beads was the same one he had made for her on a carefree afternoon, promising they would always be friends. Haruto couldn't ignore the coincidence. Could it really be the same Aiko? Everything seemed to indicate yes. The idea that she had worked for him without him realizing it unsettled him. How could he, with all his power and resources, not have recognized her? But more than that, he felt a pang of guilt realizing he had treated her so cruelly, overlooking who she truly was. He began to wonder what had happened to her since those days in the candy shop. Why was she in the United States? How did she end up working as an employee in his company? Determined to uncover the truth, Haruto delved deeper into his investigation. He revisited Aiko's information in the company records, but now with different eyes. Details that had previously seemed irrelevant started to make sense. Her work history, her references, and especially her hometown, Kanazawa, were like pieces of a puzzle he needed to assemble. Each new discovery transported him back to long-forgotten memories, from the smell of sweets in the candy shop to the sound of Aiko's laughter as they raced through the narrow neighborhood alleys. Haruto realized he had completely neglected his own humanity over the years. He had become so detached from his roots that he failed to recognize someone who had clearly been important to him. The weight of this realization unsettled him. For the first time, he felt a genuine need to rectify this. It wasn't just curiosity or guilt. It was something deeper, a feeling that he owed her something, perhaps even himself. With that in mind, Haruto made a decision that would surprise even himself. He needed to see Aiko. Not in an office, not as a CEO, but as the boy from Kanazawa who had lost touch with her. The bracelet, now carefully stored on his desk, wasn't just an object from the past. It was a reminder of something more important, that however much he had built an empire, there were parts of his life he should never have left behind. And now, he was determined to reconnect those pieces, no matter what it took. Haruto hesitated for a long moment before picking up Aiko's file once more. He wasn't a man accustomed to impulsive acts, but something inside him pushed him to act. For the first time, he ignored his rigid routine and set aside his packed schedule of important engagements. With Aiko's address in hand, he got into his car and drove to the modest neighborhood where she lived. As he approached, he felt a strange anxiety. It wasn't the millionaire Haruto Akihara who was there. It was a man trying to fix something he wasn't quite sure how he had broken. The building where Aiko lived was modest but well-maintained. Climbing the narrow steps, Haruto felt a growing discomfort. He, who was accustomed to luxurious surroundings and silent hallways of glass and marble, was now stepping into a world so distant from his own that it seemed unreal. When he finally reached the door with the number corresponding to her address, he took a deep breath and knocked. The sound echoed in the narrow hallways, and for a moment he almost regretted being there. The door opened slowly, revealing Aiko. She looked surprised and at the same time confused to see the man who had dismissed her so coldly now standing at her door. Dressed simply and with a face etched with fatigue, Aiko stared at Haruto with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. Before she could say anything, he began to speak, the words coming out faster than he expected. "I know this is the last thing you expect, but I need to talk to you." Aiko hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable, but seeing the seriousness in his eyes, she stepped aside and invited him in. The apartment was small but cozy. Family photos decorated the walls, and books and notebooks were scattered on the table, indicating that she was helping Ryota with his studies. Haruto felt like an intruder, but he also saw, for the first time, a part of Aiko that he hadn't noticed. Her world, her responsibilities, her struggle. Haruto tried to explain the reason for his visit. He mentioned the bracelet and began to talk about Kanazawa, the candy shop. and the vague memories that had resurfaced. As he spoke, Aiko's expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, perhaps a mix of recognition and disbelief. When he mentioned the girl he used to play with and the bracelet she had made, Aiko stood still, as if time had stopped. Haruto wasn't sure how to finish his thoughts, but in that moment, he felt he had taken the first step toward a greater truth. Aiko remained silent for a long moment after hearing Haruto's words. She looked at him, trying to find any trace of the boy she had known in this elegant and cold man. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. How could he remember something that was so painfully unforgettable for her? When she finally found the courage to speak, her voice came out hesitantly. "Are you saying that you're Haruto? The boy who used to come to my parents' shop?" Haruto nodded, visibly uncomfortable with the idea of sharing something so personal. He wasn't used to revisiting the past, let alone exposing his emotions. "Yes," he replied. "I didn't know, Aiko. I didn't realize it was you. I only recognized it when I saw the bracelet. I'm sorry for what happened." He seemed sincere, but Aiko still didn't know how to process it. For years, she had held on to the memory of Haruto as a precious piece of her childhood, a friend who had disappeared without explanation, leaving an emptiness in her life. As they talked, memories began to surface more clearly for both of them. Aiko recalled the afternoons when Haruto would show up at the shop, always alone but full of curiosity. He loved the sweets her parents made and often helped choose the flavors that would be sold the next day. Haruto, in turn, remembered how Aiko's parents always treated him kindly, offering him a space where he could just be a child, away from the pressures of his own family. He shared how the shop had been his refuge, the only place where he felt truly happy. Aiko couldn't help but smile as she remembered a specific day. "You were terrible at making sweets," she said, chuckling softly. "But you insisted on helping, even though my dad had to redo everything afterward." Haruto laughed for the first time in years. He hadn't realized he could still feel something so lighthearted. But Aiko's smile quickly faded as she spoke about the end of the shop. "After your family moved away, things got tough. We lost a lot of customers. And when the rent went up, we couldn't keep the business anymore." Haruto felt a knot form in his throat. He had never known what had happened to the shop or to Aiko after he left. He attempted to explain that at the time, he had no control over his family's decisions. "If I had known," he started, but Aiko interrupted him. "I don't expect you to fix the past, Haruto, but it's strange to think that after all this, you were right there, and we were complete strangers." Her tone wasn't accusatory, but resigned. For both of them, this reunion brought back memories that had been locked away for far too long. Now, those memories had to find a place in the present. As the conversation continued, Aiko revealed more about what had happened after Haruto left Kanazawa. She explained how her parents' candy shop was hit by a financial crisis when a real estate conglomerate suddenly raised rents in the area. That detail made Haruto freeze for a moment. He knew exactly which company was responsible for that. It was a subsidiary of the group he now led. Haruto felt an overwhelming weight in his chest. Unknowingly, he had become the heir to a structure that not only affected lives, but had destroyed the lives of people he knew and valued. Aiko continued, unaware of the look of shock on Haruto's face. She described how her family fought until the very end, selling whatever they could to keep the shop open. But eventually they had to close the doors. The stress took a toll on her father's health, and her already fragile mother couldn't cope with the loss. Shortly after, both passed away, leaving Aiko with the responsibility of caring for Ryota. "They always believed everything would work out," Aiko said with a melancholic smile. "But the truth is, the world isn't always fair, especially to people like us." Her words hit Haruto like a blade. He realized that while he was climbing the corporate ladder and accumulating wealth, lives like Aiko's and her family's were being crushed by the very system he helped perpetuate. For the first time, he felt the weight of the consequences of his decisions, even those made indirectly. I never knew, he said, his voice low. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm part of this. Aiko looked at him with surprise, seeing for the first time a vulnerability in the man who had once seemed unshakable. The silence between them was heavy, filled with a painful truth. Their fates were more intertwined than they could have ever imagined. After their revealing conversation, Haruto could no longer ignore the transformation occurring within him. Aiko's words, the memories of the past, and the truth about his own actions had planted a seed of change. He realized he couldn't just apologize and move on. He needed to do something concrete. Not just for Aiko, but for all the people like her who had been affected by his impersonal decisions. Driven by this newfound sense of responsibility, Haruto decided to take the initiative and reach out to Aiko again, this time with a plan. He went to her apartment and explained his proposal with a humility that was rare for him. Haruto offered financial support for Aiko and Ryota, enough to pay off debts and provide a more comfortable life. However, Aiko firmly declined. I appreciate it, Haruto, but I don't want to live off charity, she said, looking directly into his eyes. If I accept this, it would be like saying I can't build my life through my own efforts. All I want is a fair opportunity. Aiko's response left Haruto even more impressed. He saw in her determination a strength that many of the executives surrounding him daily lacked. Inspired by her resilience, Haruto offered something different, a job in a new department of the company where she could grow without fear of humiliation or judgment. If there's one thing I can guarantee, it's that no one will disrespect you again, he promised. After reflecting, Aiko accepted the offer. But before concluding their conversation, she made it clear that she had one condition. I want to earn my place, Haruto. Don't treat me differently just because you feel you owe me something. Haruto kept his promise. He personally instructed the department leaders to evaluate Aiko based on her work merit, not any personal connection to him. She quickly proved her worth, bringing creative ideas and practical solutions that impressed even the most experienced staff members. Aiko began to stand out, not as the humble young woman who spilled coffee, but as a competent and dedicated professional. Meanwhile, Haruto also began his own transformation. For the first time, he started questioning his perfectionistic and dehumanizing approach. He began dedicating time to getting to know his employees, understanding their struggles, and valuing their contributions. Meetings that were once cold and impersonal now had a more collaborative tone, and Haruto began to see the positive impact this had on the work environment. He learned that leadership wasn't just about results, but also about building a team that felt respected and valued. The bracelet, which had started it all, became a symbol of change for Haruto. He kept it on his desk where he could see it every day. It was a constant reminder that, despite his flaws, he had the chance to be better. As a leader, as a friend, as a human being. The bracelet, with its worn beads, was proof that simple, human things held a value that money could never buy. Over time, the relationship between Haruto and Aiko evolved. It wasn't based on debt or obligation, but on mutual respect. Haruto learned from Aiko's determination and integrity, while she recognized his genuine efforts to change. The two began meeting outside of work, sharing stories and memories, forging a new friendship based on truth and support. The impact of this experience was profound, not only for them, but for everyone around them. Haruto's company began to gain a reputation for treating its employees with humanity and respect, something rare in the corporate world. And for Haruto, this journey wasn't just about reconnecting with the past, but also about finding a new purpose in the present. What began with a lost bracelet became the foundation for a new beginning, for both of them. Sometimes, life confronts us with moments that seem insignificant, but carry the power to transform everything. For Haruto, the lost bracelet was more than just an object from the past. It was a portal to something he had abandoned, his humanity. By confronting Aiko, he not only rediscovered a forgotten friendship, but also a part of himself that had been buried under layers of perfectionism and ambition. The story of Haruto and Aiko is a reminder of how our choices impact lives in ways we don't always realize. Haruto had spent years chasing success and power, believing these things defined his worth. But Aiko's strength showed him that true worth lies in the ability to connect, to recognize people as more than numbers or positions. Aiko, in turn, proved that dignity and determination can withstand the toughest circumstances. She didn't allow adversity to define her, nor did she accept being reduced to someone who needed to be saved. By staying true to herself, Aiko not only rebuilt her life, but also helped Haruto rebuild his. As Haruto transformed his company, and more importantly himself, he realized that true success isn't measured by the size of a bank account or the number of contracts signed. Success, he understood, is measured by the lives we touch, the relationships we build, and the ability to learn and grow, even when confronted by our biggest mistakes. The bracelet, so simple in its appearance, became the greatest symbol of redemption for Haruto. It served as a daily reminder that it's never too late to change, to correct what's wrong, and to start over. No matter how far we stray from who we are, there's always a path back. But that path requires courage, humility, and a willingness to listen. Haruto and Aiko's reunion wasn't just a coincidence. It was a lesson. Proof that even the most fragile connections can withstand the test of time, and that compassion is a powerful force capable of healing wounds we didn't even know we carried. Sometimes all it takes is a chance encounter, a conversation, a small gesture to transform the course of our lives. And perhaps while watching this story, you've also wondered how many important connections are around us waiting to be rediscovered. How many times have we let pride or the rush of daily life prevent us from seeing what truly matters? What lessons could you learn today if you paused to listen to the people around you? If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment below sharing what moved you most. Share this message with someone who needs to hear that change is possible, even when everything seems lost. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us of what it truly means to be human. Together, we can spread more love, more empathy, and more hope into the world. Until next time.